the CineSnob podcast.
Welcome to episode 361 of the CineSnob podcast. I am your host this week, Kiko Martinez. I'm flying solo this week, but hopefully we'll have more of the gang with us next week. We had to skip last week, unfortunately, but we're coming back this week with a sort of hybrid episode. So we'll be covering 2 films from last week and then 2 from this week. So let's go ahead and get started.
Here are this week's reviews.
So the first movie on our agenda is Spider-Man Brand New Day. And I'm sure if you're watching Spider-Man Brand New Day, you're a pretty big Marvel fan that's watched everything else Spider-Man has offered this franchise. But in this one, we're following a forgotten Peter Parker who lives alone as full-time Spider-Man until mounting pressure triggers a dangerous change and a powerful new enemy emerges. So I always feel like I have to explain myself when it comes to Marvel movies or DC movies, but whenever I review a Marvel movie or any comic book movie, I feel like I have to preface it by saying that I'm not a big comic book fan. I actually consider myself more of a comic book agnostic. So I don't have a strong alliance to any particular comic book universe, studio, or character. I'm not especially invested in comic book lore. So for me, I'm just judging these movies as movies, right? So I also didn't watch like the Punisher TV series to prepare for this movie, despite, the Punisher playing such a major role in this sequel. So for me, what really stood out in this sequel was the frenemy relationship between Spider-Man and the Punisher. That was probably my favorite part of the movie. I think their dynamic was both funny and genuinely character-driven. So more importantly, the relationship, I thought, grounded both characters in a way that made me care about them beyond, that superhero arc. So I also really enjoyed the emotional sections that were dealing with Peter's sadness over the fact that nobody remembers him. I thought everything that had to do with that was surprisingly effective. So I thought there was a real sense of loneliness and grief beneath the superhero persona. And those moments had a lot of heart and sensitivity. So that, especially in a movie where many of the viewers that are coming into the theaters are primarily showing up for, fight scenes and special effects, which again, there's nothing wrong with that. I go to a good superhero movie as well to see some good fight scenes and special effects. But when it comes to Marvel movies, again, I'm generally, when it comes to the ones that I enjoy, I'm generally a one good guy versus one bad guy kind of moviegoer, right? I don't mind a crowded superhero movie when the story can handle it. For example, Spider-Man No Way Home did perfectly well with 1 billion characters, I thought. But more often than not, multiple heroes and villains, I think, make these movies feel, unnecessarily convoluted. So I'd rather see one great rivalry develop properly. And so that's why I wasn't particularly interested in the Jean Grey storyline, especially the mind games and the way her spirit takes over the bodies of ordinary people. There's something almost kind of like that horror movie a few years ago called It Follows about that premise. But for me, it pulled the movie away from the more grounded character conflict that I found much more compelling. So one of the things that interested me the most going into a movie like this was the fact that Daniel Destin Cretton was directing. I think that Daniel Destin doesn't get enough credit for how well he handled another Marvel movie a few years ago, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. I thought it was a Marvel movie that inevitably got overshadowed by bigger Avenger movies and things like that. But I've been following Creighton for a while. He directed Short Term 12. Look that one up. It was one of my favorite independent films of the past 15 years. So I love when Marvel gives the reins to these enormous blockbuster productions to filmmakers like Daniel Destin, who have proven themselves on smaller, more personal movies. So there's something exciting about seeing an indie filmmaker like him bring that sensibility to a billion-dollar franchise. So it's a little sad, though. I have to admit that when Marvel scoops up these talented filmmakers, they never seem to make another indie film again. And it's hard to blame. I do the same thing if nobody's saying no to a billion-dollar franchise, right? I mean, it's pretty hard to do. You see Chloe Zhao do the same thing. lots of directors get scooped up, but it shows you that people are identifying them as a talent. So I'm glad that Daniel Destin got another Marvel movie, and he does a good job with this one. So as far as the overall Spider-Man franchise goes, I think Brand New Day lands somewhere in the middle for me. The two animated Spider-Verse movies are still at the top, while the two Andrew Garfield movies sit at the bottom, and everything else falls somewhere in between, although I'd give Tom Holland's Spider-Man movies a slight edge over Tobey Maguire's. So I think the final thought I have on Spider-Man Brand New Day. Sorry, I lost my notes real quick. Spider-Man Brand New Day. I think it worked best for me when it slows down and focuses on these two characters, Spider-Man and the Punisher, rather than get into any over-exaggerated spectacle. I think that dynamic and Peter's emotional journey are the elements I'd remember most in this movie. Not necessarily the complicated Marvel mythology that comes with it. And don't give me any homework, Marvel. I don't want to see. Don't make me see another TV show just to understand what's happening in the movie. I don't like that. So, Brand New Day. Again, it gives Tom Holland, as part of the franchise, more emotional weight and personality to keep the character feeling fresh. So, are these movies going to continue? Probably. Am I going to go see Spider-Man again with Tom Holland? I definitely will. And I hope that he stays at the top of this franchise and keeps on putting out strong content. So for this one, Spider-Man Brand New Day, I am giving it a solid B. All right. Up next is one of the movies that is newer to the theater menu, I guess you could say. That this one came out a couple of days ago, and it's called Ice Cream Man, not to be confused with I think it was from the 1990s with Clint Howard. It was another horror movie called Ice Cream Man, but this movie is directed by Eli Roth, and it is about a summer town that descends into madness when an ice cream man serves kids sweet delights with horrifying results. And if you see the movie poster, of course, there's a little girl holding a severed head and an ice cream cone in the other hand, and there's a very creepy ice cream truck with an ice cream man inside, kind of looking over her shoulder. So you know what you're going to get just based on the movie poster and the trailer, and the fact that it is being directed by Eli Roth. If you're not familiar with Eli Roth, he started his career with torture porn movies like Hostel and that series. I've never considered myself much of an Eli Roth fan. I think his brand of horror has always leaned too heavily in the kind of, like I said, torture porn excess that, define movies like Cabin Fever and the aforementioned Hostel franchise, which neither of them did much for me. So there's also the Green Inferno, didn't win me over. And I thought actually his 2018 movie, if I'm not mistaken, the remake of Death Wish, was easily one of the worst movies of that year. If you go back and watch it, it's pretty horrible, pretty impossible to watch, actually. It's just one of those films that just is pretty bad. So if you ask me to name my favorite Eli Roth performance or work of the past 25 years, I'd probably cop out and say that his turn as Donnie the Bear Jew Donowitz in Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards was it. But of course, that's that's him as an actor and not a director. I think he's just an acquired taste, and after 25 years, I'm beginning to accept the fact that it's a taste that I'm probably never going to acquire. So that said, Ice Cream Man, I think, feels closer to Roth's 2023 slasher Thanksgiving than his earlier torture-heavy work. There's still plenty of gore, don't get me wrong, but the movie seems more interested in getting an audience to laugh at the carnage rather than get sickened by it. So I think there's a lot of gross-out sequences in Ice Cream Man that are exaggerated to the point of like absurdity, which makes them considerably easier to stomach if you're that kind of person that doesn't really like gore than the more punishing violence in something like Hostel. So I think if you can handle something like Thanksgiving but have trouble sitting through Hostel, then you might be okay with this Roth movie. Although again, the cartoonish violence the gory violence, somebody gets their brain scooped out of their head with an ice cream scooper, things like that. I think those gross out sequences, are fine. I think that I'll give the movie credit for knowing exactly what it is. It doesn't take its ridiculous premise particularly seriously, and that self awareness keeps the movie from becoming completely completely unbearable. But yeah, unfortunately, this is about as much praise as I can give it. Being self aware only gets you so far when the material itself isn't particularly memorable. It's not, we're not talking about like Yui Bowl or Rob Zombie bad. I know there's some Rob Zombie defenders out there, but I'm not with you. But it does have this unmistakable feel of like the kind of horror movie you might have stumbled across in the straight to DVD section of Blockbuster like 25 years ago, and you probably skipped right over it. And it's one of those films. So, and then also the villain, the titular villain, the killer, he's also pretty forgettable as a horror villain. There was a lack of personality and like evilness that might have made him stick around in terms of the genre. He had a little bit of a Freddy Krueger backstory to him from the 2010 remake. But he wasn't somebody that looked like he was good at terrorizing children, more like someone who's eaten a few sundaes sprinkled with Prozac. I don't know. He just didn't feel like a really good villain to me. So, for all its blood and jokes and melted ice cream cones, I thought Ice Cream Man never quite gives you reason to care about any of it, any of the characters, any of the kills. So the movie, I think, had more chuckles than some of Roth's earlier torture fests, but in all honesty, it's about as entertaining as a brain freeze. So for me, I am giving this movie a C-. All right, moving on to movie number 3. This is another movie that came out a couple of weeks ago, so it was the show that we skipped. This was a straight to Prime Video movie called The Devil's Mouth. So another I would call it a horror slash thriller, a thriller slash horror. The Devil's Mouth. Let me tell you what it's about real quick. I can click on it. Give me a sec. Yeah, so this movie follows a group of college friends on a Thailand adventure, which turns deadly when they become trapped in submerged caves with a dangerous predator. The predator, of course, is a shark. As oxygen runs low, past conflicts emerge in their desperate fight for survival. So yeah, you know what? It's so crazy that I don't know if you, how many of y'all listening out there are shark movie fans, but there's been a lot of shark movies this year. We've had a handful, including Deep Water, Above and Below, Thrash, which came out on Netflix, if I'm not mistaken. But none of them have exactly, left a lasting impression on me. And unfortunately, Devil's Mouth doesn't break that streak. Now, I'm a big fan of Catherine Newton. She's established herself, this actress who's the lead actress in this, as one of the better modern finals girls, thanks to movies like Freaky and Abigail and Ready or Not 2. I thought she has, I always think she has a charisma and screen presence to carry this kind of movie, which kind of makes it, frustrating that Devil's Mouth that Devil's Mouth gave her so little to work with. So this movie is set in a cave system where these young people find themselves trapped with this shark, and it should be one of the movie's biggest assets, right? But there's very little that feels genuinely adventurous or frightening about these cave systems. I think a good cave thriller should make you feel like claustrophobic just watching it. And here the caves, they mostly feel just like a dark place where, characters are waiting for the next shark attack. So the bigger problem is that the young characters aren't given enough personality to make us particularly care about whether they survive or not, which is a pretty bad thing if you're a screenwriter for a movie about a shark. So when a shark movie starts killing people, you should have at least you should have like a favorite character that you hope makes it out alive, right? But here I found myself more interested, in just wondering when those credits would roll. So, and then of course the shark itself. Again, lots of shark movies. Everybody has its own take on what a terrible shark horror movie villain looks like. And in this one, it's less terrifying. It's a less terrifying underwater predator, and more like a CGI rendering that came from another movie, maybe like Sharknado or something like that. So I thought the CGI did very little to make the creature feel like it was actually there. Just looked like a fin at times, and then other times it just looked like nothing that was very threatening that is gonna hurt anybody. But so yeah, that's a big problem when you have a shark movie and you're not really scared of the shark. I have to give the movie a little bit of credit. I think the most promising element of the film was the toxic friendship between Newton's character and actress Lana Condor's character. I thought that was interesting. There's clearly some complicated history between them, and their relationship has the potential to give the movie an emotional dimension beyond these people that are trapped in a cave with a shark. But unfortunately, the screenplay just never digs deep enough into that friendship. So I think the movie, it really hints at jealousy and all these unresolved issues between these two young women. But then all of a sudden it remembers that there needs to be another shark bite, so it gets back to that. So, and it's a shame because that relationship was a lot more interesting than most of what was happening with the shark. And so I would have liked to have seen part of that narrative built a little bit more, and then have the shark, of course, support that what was going on with that relationship. I would say to watch The Descent instead if what you really want is a horror movie about a toxic female friendship unfolding inside a cave system. If you haven't seen The Descent, it's a 2005 British horror film. These women in this movie are dealing with spelunking and cave monsters rather than a freshwater shark, but the characters and relationships are a lot richer. So if you haven't checked out that movie, The Descent, you should. So yeah, I think overall, The Devil's Mouth, it has the ingredients to be a decent survival thriller. There's a talented final girl in Catherine Newton. There's a giant predator, but almost none of those ingredients are developed particularly well. I thought the plot was weak. I thought the characters are weak, and the shark just looked like a computer-created shark that doesn't really do anything other than float around and bite people. So if that's what you're into, that's cool. If you're not, then turn around next week and there'll probably be another one. But right now these are a dime a dozen, and unfortunately The Devil's Mouth is at the bottom side of that. So I am leaning. Let me think. I'm going to go ahead and give this one a C- as well. So not we're 0 for 2 when it comes to the horror thriller movies this week. Hopefully they'll get better next week, because the last one actually is another horror thriller movie that we're going to talk about, and this is a new one that just hit Netflix, and it's called The Last House. And so The Last House follows a family of 4 who is suddenly sealed inside their house with no way out and must work together to survive against both their dwindling resources and the mysterious looming threat that is keeping them trapped inside. Now, where to start with this one? I'm probably going to be harsher on The Last House because of the 3 horror thrillers I watched this week. It's easily the one that had the most going for it on paper. And, with this cast and this promising premise, I expected, a lot more. So the movie stars Oscar nominee Wagner Moura, and then also Greta Lee, who won audiences over with her Oscar nominated. Sorry, not Oscar nominated. Was she Oscar nominated? She might have been. I'll have to check on that. But she was in the Oscar-nominated film Past Lives. I don't think she was nominated for that, but I'll check. So anyway, Wagner Moura and Greta Lee in the same movie. That's a pretty impressive pair of actors to put in a single house and, ask them to carry out this thriller. So the writer here, it was written by Matthew Robinson, who earlier this year wrote Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die. Now, I wasn't particularly in love with that movie, despite a generally positive reception from everybody else. But I could at least appreciate the creativity that came from his script. Unfortunately, very little of that imagination seems to have followed him into The Last House. The premise, I think, is intriguing enough. A family is trapped inside their home and has no idea why they can't leave, right? It initially reminded me of that film, Cloverfield Lane, where something clearly has gone terribly wrong outside, but the characters and the audience aren't immediately told what it is. In this one, of course, they can't leave. Well, they can leave, but they choose not to. In this one, they just can't leave at all. They're like, they can't open the doors. When they break a window, the window, like all the cracks in the window start sealing up, and it has to do something with the rain that just came. So like there's like something in the rain that's holding them inside, right? So I thought, the problem for me is that it doesn't do much with that premise, right? We watch days turn into weeks and weeks turn into months and then years, and then nothing really happens inside the house. Like I understand that not every family what was doing amazing things during like COVID. I know the COVID lockdown, I know my family wasn't, but this is Hollywood. I'm allowed to expect something a little more interesting than watching people play board games and read. I guess, I don't know. So I wanted more tension. I wanted a movie about being trapped inside a house for years. It should make you feel claustrophobic. It should make you feel tense. Instead, like this film, like it just had me restless, right? There's very little urgency or a feeling of dread or escalating tension, and I kept waiting for that movie to finally kick into gear. And then when it finally did, unfortunately, when that movie finally reveals what has trapped this family inside the house, and I won't give you any spoilers, but things just don't get more interesting. They actually get a lot more dumb and sillier, and the explanation completely derails whatever mystery the first half of the film had established. And it's interesting because the second half gave me this feeling of watching another badly written M. Night Shyamalan movie. Like, do you remember he was great in The Sixth Sense, and then again with sorry, it's slipping my mind. He was great with The Sixth Sense, and then with Joaquin Phoenix and his Alien film. Why is that movie slipping my mind right now? I always talk about it. I don't know why I'm Signs. Hello, God, I can't even think right now. Sorry about that. So Signs, yeah. And then after Signs, he just totally flopped for whatever reason. He just hasn't made a movie in that's really good in a long time. So yeah, it just this intriguing high concept premise followed by like a revelation that makes you wish that the filmmaker had come up with a better explanation. I don't know how else to put it, but the movie spends so much time withholding information that you naturally assume the answer is going to be worth the wait, and then when it finally arrives with Shyamalan, it was like the twist, right? But when this one finally arrives, it feels like there's no payoff, and they've completely run out. They wrote themselves into a corner, and I have no idea what to do with the last 45 minutes. By the end, as the third act is playing out, I just kept feeling like this is what would happen if Home Alone suddenly decided it was a science fiction movie. And you're watching this family try to survive this thing happening to them and why they can't leave their house, and it just gets sillier and sillier and sillier, and you're wishing that Joe Pesci would pop up and save the day, but unfortunately he doesn't. So again, I just thought it was a frustrating example of what a good premise, a movie with a good premise, just completely being wasted. And I found it disappointing because Mora and Lee and this writer, they're capable a lot more imaginative storytelling. There was potential, but with all that mystery stretching for years and years and then resolving it with an explanation that feels pointless was just a dud for me, unfortunately. So again, three bad, underwhelming thriller horror movies this week, and I'm going to be fairly critical of this one, and I'm dropping a D plus on this one. So yeah, only one out of the four movies I'm reviewing this week, and that's Spider-Man Brand New Day that I would actually recommend. But we'll have a whole new batch of reviews next week. Until then, be sure to check out CineSnob.net this week, where I have new interviews. So check them out. I have an interview with actress Sarah Abbott and actor Benjamin Baron Davis for Ice Cream Man, actually. So we get to talk to them about their work in that. And then I also have interviews with director Jesse V. Johnson and actress Laura Morano for another shark movie, Above and Below, that came out this week. And then finally, I have an interview with actor Jesse Garcia, who you might remember from the Hot Cheetos movie Flamin' Hot. He is in The Odyssey, if you don't know that. He plays one of Matt Damon's shipmates in that. So all of that and more at CineSnob.net. Be sure to like us and follow us at YouTube, at our YouTube channel. You can also reach us at our website if you have any questions or any movie recommendations. We're open to all of that. So check us out, and until next week, we will see you soon.
Thank you for listening to this CineSnob podcast. To read reviews, interviews, and more, visit CineSnob.net. See you next week.